He sent it at 2:13 a.m., just 43 seconds long. But by the time he deleted the voice note, it was already too late, because Ibrahim Traoré had heard everything. It was 2:13 a.m. in Malibu. The ocean outside whispered like it was keeping secrets, while inside a silent villa perched on the cliffs, Robert Downey Jr. sat hunched over his phone. He hadn't slept. Not really. Not since the memory returned. A name, a voice, a soldier he once knew and never talked about again. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp beside an untouched cup of tea. Robert's hands hovered over the screen like they were holding something fragile. He opened his contacts. Number. Plan. Just a feeling. And there it was, a name he barely remembered saving. Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso. Robert blinked. Why was that name in his phone? A charity gala? A quiet exchange through mutual friends? He didn't know. But the moment felt too heavy to ignore. Without thinking, he hit record. His voice came out low, cracked by years he rarely spoke about. I don't know if this number even works, but I needed to say this. I knew a man once, long ago. He wasn't famous, wasn't loud, but he had that same fire in his eyes, the kind I see in you. A breath. Then he continued. He was a soldier, a listener, a man who never asked for help. And I failed him. I never called back. I told myself he'd be fine, that it wasn't my place. But when he took his own life, I realized silence is the loudest kind of guilt. His voice trembled now. I saw one of your interviews recently. You didn't say much, but your eyes, they reminded me of him. I thought, maybe if I told you what I never told him, I'd sleep better. A pause. Just enough to feel like he was holding something back. I don't know if I'll ever say this again. And with that, click. Message ended. His thumb hovered over the voice note. A beat of silence. Then he hit delete. Gone. Or so he thought. But across the ocean, deep in the quiet hours of a compound in Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré's phone buzzed once. He was alone. No meetings, no cameras, no noise. Just him and the quiet hum of the desert wind outside. The message had no sender name, just a US number. He opened it, pressed play, and as Robert's voice spilled through the speaker, Traoré didn't move. Not a blink, not a breath out of place. He listened once, then again, then placed the phone down slowly and whispered to his aide, "Find out where he is. I'm going there myself." The sun was just beginning to rise in California. A golden thread of light slipped between the clouds and spread across the Malibu cliffs, brushing the windows of Robert Downey Jr.'s home. He hadn't slept, not even for a minute. He kept staring at his phone, screen black, voice note gone. He whispered to himself more than once, "Why did I do that?" But the silence had already swallowed the message. He poured himself coffee he wouldn't drink, paged through an old journal he hadn't touched in years, walked in circles, barefoot, through the same 3 rooms like a man waiting for something that wouldn't come until something did. 2 slow knocks. He froze. The kind of knock that doesn't ask. The kind that knows. He opened the door cautiously, blinking against the rising sun. His breath caught. There, standing in a plain black jacket and desert boots dusted with sand, was Ibrahim Traoré. No security. No press. No explanation. Just him. Robert didn't speak. Neither did Traoré. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. 2 men from opposite worlds, bound by something unspoken. "You heard it," Robert finally said, voice quiet. "Before you deleted it," Traoré replied, calm. but firm. Robert stepped aside, unsure what else to do. Traoré entered slowly, looking around at the silent house. No photos on the walls, no trophies. Just a guitar in the corner, a flickering candle, and an old movie poster folded in the hallway, like someone had tried to forget who they used to. Robert gestured to the couch. Neither man sat. "It was never meant to reach you," Robert said. "Then why did you send it?" Traoré asked. Robert exhaled, rubbing his hand over his face. "Because I was alone in a room, and I couldn't carry it anymore." Traoré tilted his head slightly, as if looking for something beyond Robert's words. Not judgment, just truth. "Who was he?" he asked. Robert hesitated, then walked to a drawer, opened it, pulled out a small, weathered photo. Just two men in military gear, grinning. One was Robert. The other was Eli. "He saved me before I ever saved myself," Robert said. "Not from drugs, not from jail, just from disappearing." He held the photo like it was all that was left. "I ghosted him after rehab. Thought I'd pull him up later when I was stronger, but I was too late. A beat passed. Then another. And then I saw you on the news, standing in silence while a whole nation cried behind you. And I swear to God, it was the same look. Like you buried a man and never got to say goodbye." Traoré's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened slightly. "I've buried more than one," he said, "but the silence never gets easier." Robert sank into the couch now. For the first time, he looked tired, not from fame or years of work, but from holding back. "I sent you that voice note thinking it would vanish, that no one would hear it. And now you're standing in my living room, and I feel like I just handed you the last piece of myself." Traoré sat across from him, calm, composed, but something in his jaw tightened. "Maybe you did, but maybe that's what you needed." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded cloth, worn, faded, but neatly kept. He placed it on the table. Robert looked, confused. "What is that?" "It belonged to someone I lost," Traoré said. "Daniel, my friend, my brother in uniform. He wrote me a letter I never opened until a year after he died." Robert leaned forward, breath caught. "What did it say?" Traoré's voice turned low. He said, "If you ever find someone carrying the same silence you do, don't let them walk with it alone." Robert stared at the cloth, then at Traoré. "So you flew here for that?" "No," Traoré said. "I flew here because you weren't asking for help. You were confessing." And then, for the first time that morning, the silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt shared. Robert leaned back. The house, the ocean, the past, it all suddenly felt smaller. "I don't know how to let go," he said softly. "You don't need to," Traoré replied. "You just need someone to carry it with you." And in that moment, two men, one known for iron suits, the other for iron resolve, sat in a quiet room, sharing a grief neither of them had spoken aloud. Until now, for a long while, the two men sat in silence. Not the kind that comes from awkwardness, but the kind that settles between two souls who've both tasted the bitter weight of unfinished goodbyes. Outside, the Pacific crashed gently against the rocks, as if even the ocean was listening. Robert finally broke the stillness. "I've stood on stages in front of millions, but I've never told anyone about him, about Eli." He glanced down at the old photo again. His thumb traced the faded edge. "We met at a military fundraiser. He wasn't flashy, no medals, no bravado, but he saw straight through me. No judgment, just stillness. The kind you only recognize when yours has been shattered." Robert's voice softened. He used to say, "Some wounds scream, Others whisper, but both bleed. And I laughed. I always laughed. He swallowed hard until he stopped messaging, until the whisper turned into silence. Traoré didn't speak. He just listened, deeply, like few ever had. Robert rubbed his hands together, restless. I kept thinking, I'll reach out later. I'll check on him when I'm stronger. But there's no later when someone's already made their final decision. He looked up, his eyes slightly red. So I buried his memory in work, in suits, in sarcasm. But the truth? I've been haunted by that silence ever since. Traoré leaned forward now. Then do something with it. Like what? Robert asked. Traoré held up the cloth again, the one from Daniel. Speak his name. Let it echo. Let others who are hurting know they're not alone. Robert nodded slowly. You want me to speak at something? No, Traoré said. I want you to build something. Something that lives longer than both of us. Robert blinked. You mean a foundation? No, something quieter, more human. Traoré paused, then added, there's a gathering I attend every year. No cameras. Just souls who carry names no one else hears anymore. I want you there, and I want you to bring Eli with you. Robert looked like he was trying to catch his breath. You really think I'm the kind of man people listen to for that? Traoré stared at him. You've played a man in an iron suit, but maybe it's time you show the world what's underneath it. That line hit deep. Robert leaned back, processing. His hands shook slightly. If I go, I need to do it right. I want to write him a letter. The one I never sent. The one I should have sent when he asked if the voices ever stop. Traoré nodded once. Then write it, and bring it to the circle. They stood now. No handshake. No embrace. Just something far more sacred. Understanding. Traoré turned toward the door. But before he stepped out, Robert asked, how did you survive your silence? Traoré paused. Then, without turning back, he said, by realizing that strength isn't silence. It's speaking, even when your voice shakes. And with that, he left, leaving Robert alone, but no longer empty. That night, for the first time in years, Robert sat at his old desk, the one he used to write on before fame swallowed his mornings, and put pen to paper. The title read, To Eli, my brother in the quiet. And with every word he wrote, the silence inside him finally began to speak. It wasn't held in a grand hall. There were no red carpets, no press, no names printed on guest lists. Just a small wooden retreat center an hour outside San Francisco, built on a hill surrounded by trees, wind, and silence. The kind of silence that didn't hurt, but healed. They called it the Circle of Names. Once a year, people gathered not to speak for themselves, but to speak for those who no longer could. And on that cool autumn morning, Robert Downey Jr. walked through its doors, a folded letter in his jacket and Eli's name in his chest like a second heartbeat. He wore no sunglasses, no designer coat, just an old hoodie and jeans. He looked like any other man trying not to come undone. Traoré stood quietly near the circle's edge. He didn't wave or greet him. He just nodded, the kind of nod soldiers give before stepping into memory. Inside the hall, about 30 people sat in a loose circle. No stage, no microphone, just chairs. And one open seat in the center, reserved for the one brave enough to begin. Robert sat at the edge, fingers trembling slightly. One by one, people began to rise. A mother shared her son's name. A veteran whispered a friend's last words. A young girl, barely 17, spoke of her older brother who never made it home from college. Every name was spoken twice. Once by the person, once by the room, to echo, to honor, to remember. Then it was Robert's turn. He stood, letter shaking in his hands, and walked to the center. No introduction, no performance, just him. And the ghost he carried. He unfolded the paper slowly. To Eli, I should have written this years ago. I should have called you back. I should have told you that your silence scared me because it sounded too much like mine. His voice cracked. But he didn't stop. I thought strength meant pretending I was okay. But you never pretended. You were honest. And I wasn't. I told myself I'd reach out when I was ready. But by the time you were gone. The room listened in stillness. I want to believe you're still somewhere. Not because I need comfort, but because someone like you doesn't just vanish. You echo in people like me, in every veteran who fights a war, long after the battlefield is quiet, in every laugh I force through guilt. You're in all of it. He paused, breathing shallow. This letter is late, but it's the only way I know how to say, I carry you now. And I'll speak your name where others stay silent. He lowered the paper. His name was Eli Monroe. And without cue, the entire room replied, Eli Monroe. Something broke open inside him then, but it wasn't grief. It was release. As he sat back down, head bowed, a hand touched his shoulder. It was a teenage boy, skinny, pale, eyes red. I saw your movies, the boy whispered. But this is the first time I ever really saw you. Robert looked up, startled. Who are you here for? The boy opened a folded photo. 2 young men smiling on a fishing boat. My brother. He said you once came to his rehab center and made him laugh. That day was the last time I saw him smile. Robert's breath caught. What was his name? Jacob. Robert's eyes widened. I remember him. The boy nodded. And speak him too. Robert rose. Again, his name was Jacob Lane. And again, the room echoed. Jacob Lane. Traoré stood now. Steady, fierce, soft. And this is why we gather. Not to mourn, to remember, to rescue the names the world forgets. And in that room far from red carpets, headlines, and history, 2 men who had worn armor their entire lives finally laid it down. 3 weeks later, the internet was doing what it always did, spinning headlines, chasing gossip, manufacturing outrage, until something different appeared. A short video, no promo, no interviews, no background music, just Robert Downey Jr. sitting alone on a wooden bench with a folded letter in his hands, his voice low and raw. It wasn't posted by a studio. It wasn't filtered or styled. It was uploaded anonymously, with the caption. He said he'd never speak about it publicly, until now. And within minutes, the world stopped scrolling. The video played. I know what you expect from me. Jokes, charm, a comeback line. But I'm not here as Iron Man. I'm here as Robert. A man who got a message one night and deleted it because it scared him. He looked up, eyes tired but clear. I had a friend. His name was Eli Monroe. He didn't wear a cape. He never saved the world, but he saved me. And I never told him because I thought there'd be time. A long pause. This isn't a campaign. This isn't for press. This is me trying to make sure his name isn't lost in the silence. Then he opened the same letter from the circle and read it again, word for word. No edits, no second takes. At the end, he simply said, his name was Eli Monroe, and I carry him with me now. Then the screen faded to black. One final line appeared in white. Speak their name before the silence does. That was it. No studio logo, no hashtag, and somehow that made it even louder. Within 48 hours, the video had been shared 82 million times. Messages poured in from soldiers, nurses, teachers, brothers, sons. I never said it out loud. Until now. I carry one too. His name was David. Her name was Asisha. Their name was mine. Across the world, people began to post names. No stories, no hashtags, just names. Because sometimes, the name is the story. Traoré, watching from a distance, smiled quietly. He didn't repost the video. He didn't comment. He just sent Robert one message. You didn't just speak. You made the silence echo. And that, perhaps, was the most heroic thing Robert Downey Jr. had ever done. Not in armor, not on screen, but with a whisper that turned into a wave. A voice note that should have disappeared became the start of something millions never knew they needed. If this story moves something in you, speak their name. Before the silence does, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon. Because every name we remember keeps another soul from being forgotten. Some voices never fade. They just wait for someone brave enough to speak them out loud.